Welcome to the second lecture narration on developmental psychology. So in this narration, in this lecture, I'm going to talk about some topics including social development and other aspects of development. So let's start with social development. And we can begin with infant attachment, a very important matter, if we will. Okay, so what we mean by infant attachment, or attachment in general, is developing an emotional tie with another person, and that's shown in young children by their seeking closeness to the caregiver and showing distress when separated from the caregiver. Now, usually the first attachment is to the mother. In some cases, the primary caregiver is not the mother, and that would be the object of attachment. So preference for the mother's or the primary caretaker's company occurs at around 6 to 8 months of age. And remember, that's right around the time a child has developed object permanence, right? To use Piaget's term. At about 8 months, soon after object permanence develops, children separated from their caregivers display stranger anxiety. You've probably experienced this in watching children. The primary caretaker goes away, mom goes away, and the kid, starts crying, shows a lot of anxiety and unease. Okay. Now, infants form attachments not simply because parents gratify biological needs, but more importantly because they are comfortable, familiar, and responsive. Now, another key to attachment is familiarity. So remember, in a previous narration I talked about the idea of a critical period. Okay, this is the period in which an organism is maximally sensitive to experiences that will foster or contribute or support the development of a characteristic, a quality. In this case, what we're talking about is attachment. Now, the critical period for forming secure attachment in humans is in the 8 months to 2 years period, okay, after object permanence is established. So this is a time when the child is maximally ready to make this connection, make this contact, and feel a secure attachment and attraction to the caregiver, the primary caregiver. Before that time, there's not really total object permanence. Attachment probably isn't happening. After that time, after the child is about 2 years old at the oldest, indeed, if there hasn't been this kind of bond or attachment that's been formed, it's going to be very difficult for that to form. Okay? The critical period for that is past. Now, an interesting concept, an interesting phenomenon that's been observed in animals is what's called imprinting. Okay, this is the animal version of attachment. This is the process by which certain animals form strong attachments during early life. Now, Conrad Lorenz, that's misspelled, okay, is a ethologist who studied imprinting basically in ducks and geese. He studied other organisms as well. He was an ethologist, but attachment in the form of imprinting was pretty much readily observed in fowl of these sort. So, what happens, say, with a duck? Okay, when a duck hatches, okay, they basically will, right from birth, okay, and they can waddle around pretty quickly after birth. They'll instinctively follow the mother, okay, and it turns out that the mother goose, if you will. We'll talk if we want to talk about geese, ducks and geese. Is the first moving, living object that under normal circumstances, that the duck, um, the duckling basically sees. Okay, and so the first object it imprints upon is the term. It imprints on the first. It imprints on the first object, moving, living object. It seems, and that's almost always the mother. And so it'll then follow the mother and try to stay close to the mother. And you can see the evolutionary significance of this imprinting, right? Because for the duckling's safety and survival, it makes a lot of sense to stay close to mom. Okay, uh, who will protect and nurture and take care of it. Okay, and protect it from predators and so on. Okay. Uh, but what Lorenz was able to demonstrate is that it doesn't have to be the mother goose. It doesn't have to be the mother duck. Okay, so he did studies in which the eggs would hatch, and for example, another kind of organism would be there. Okay, for example, Lorenz. Okay, Conrad Lorenz himself. Okay, and the ducklings would imprint upon him. So there's famous pictures of him walking along. Again, this is in Switzerland, where Piaget was from, walking along a lake, a lakeside, path, and you see all these little ducks following him wherever he went. Okay, they had attached, they had been attached to, they had imprinted upon Lorenz. Okay, and Lorenz showed that they'll even imprint upon what otherwise might be a natural enemy. Okay, like a cat. Okay, a docile kind of cat that would not harm it. But the cat's there when the duckling hatches, and it imprints upon the cat. Okay, it tries to stay close to the cat. Normally a natural enemy, right? So this imprinting will occur upon any moving object seen during that early, in this case it's very early, the first day or so of first day or two of life for the ducks. Okay, during that critical period of development. Okay, so it's very analogous. It's a form of attachment, right? Of a bond. Okay. And analogously, that is something that occurs with humans as well, much later in infancy, but equally, if not more, important to the survival and to the healthy development of the child. Now, so imprinting is the animal version of attachment. We saw that. Somehow I have a redundancy in my slides. To review, I guess, attachment is a strong affectional bond between the infant and caregiver. Basically a repetition of the previous slide, but repetition and redundancy is often a good aid to learning, right? So what produces attachment? We said it's not just satisfying biological needs, right? Well, do babies attach to those who feed them or those who provide comfort? Okay. So Harry Harlow, okay, a very famous psychologist, spent many decades at the University of Wisconsin, and in fact, one of the psychology buildings there is named after him. But Harlow did these important, but in some cases troubling studies. I don't know to what extent that they could readily be done today with our increased sensitivity and understanding of animals, particularly higher order animals such as primates. But he did research in which infant rhesus monkeys, okay, he did a whole series of studies like this, and variations. So infant monkeys are separated from their mother, okay, and they live in a large cage. They're raised in a large cage in which there are two surrogate or substitute quote unquote mothers in the cage. Okay, so one of them is this one on the left. I'm sorry. The one on the right, it has it's made of wire. Okay, it's got a wooden head. It's also got a bottle. Okay, where the infant rhesus monkey can feed. Okay. The other one is covered in soft terry cloth. There's no food, okay, available, but it is warm and cuddly and soft. Okay. So the question is, which mother, if you will, would the baby monkey prefer? Okay. Well, in one study, both had nipples supplying milk. Actually, in the first study, everything was like this, except that there was also milk provided by the one with the soft terry cloth. And so what Harlow observed was, so when the monkey was under stress, when they were nervous, when they were scared, when they were tired, where would they gravitate? And they would gravitate toward the one with the and cuddle with the one with the soft terry cloth blankety cover. Okay. Well, you could say, well, okay, there's milk in both cases, so add a little bit to the milk in the form of the terry cloth mother, terry cloth, that could explain it. So then he did research in which only one has the milk. It's the one that's not soft and cuddly, and the other one is just soft and cuddly. Okay, and then so in that research, the monk, whether or not, in either study, even when we got to this situation, the monkeys almost exclusively preferred the terry cloth mother, even when the terry cloth mother didn't have a nipple, didn't provide milk. Okay, so there would be, do little experiments, little procedures in which, for example, the monkey's playing around. The monkey's being raised in isolation. And so they open the cage and they enter a scary little robot-like toy that makes all this noise, and it motors ahead, and it scares the bejesus out of the poor little baby monkey. And what does the monkey do? The monkey runs directly to the mother, not the one with the food, but the one that's soft and cuddly. It would spend its time cuddling against that mother. If it was exploring of toys, various kinds of toys, and other kinds of interesting objects were placed in the room, including, for example, an unusual kind of food that looked good and that it wanted to eat and stuff, it would explore while it was sort of like hanging on to the mother, just like a baby wants to stay close to mom while it holds on to mom while it explores this environment and interesting objects around it. So in times of exploration, in times of rest, in times of stress, there was always this preference for the terry cloth mother. Okay, the soft, cuddly one that provided this contact, what we could call contact comfort. We'll get to that in a second. Let's hold on. So the contact comfort became a very, very critical kind of variable here. No matter what you did in terms of providing food and other good stuff with the one that didn't provide contact comfort, we still ended up with a preference for this one. And he did other studies in which not just one, but several infant monkeys were raised together in isolation from birth. Okay, and they were, you could observe their behavior that they spent a lot of time, particularly when they were scared or when they were playfully exploring their environment, but in a kind of like exploring new kinds of things. The monkeys, let's say there were 4 of them that were being raised together, they would basically clump together with one behind the other, holding onto it, cuddling up against it, and then the other monkey, the third monkey, doing the same thing to the second monkey and the fourth monkey. So they made this sort of choo-choo train, okay? And they would move around that way, okay, close to each other, okay? When they were apart and they were stressed out by some stimulus that was introduced into their environment, they'd gather together and cuddle. So contact comfort became seemed to be the significant kind of thing that would produce, that was necessary for this attachment to occur. Okay. So touch, contact. Okay. So we got to my, we know, for example, that premature babies often undergo various kinds of massage therapy, that they do better in terms of restoring, getting to health and getting back to, to a healthy state when there is massage, when there's all this touch and comfort contact going on. Okay, so the principle here is that what seems to be critical for attachment is contact comfort, more critical than merely food, okay, satisfying biological needs, that there's something beyond biological needs, okay, in the form of contact comfort that's necessary to produce an attachment. So another way of studying attachment is through what's known as the strange situation, okay? And so when we get to human beings, we can start talking about attachment that is either a very secure attachment or a less secure kind of anxious attachment to the caretaker, okay, to the mother, in perhaps most cases. So kids, on the basis of how they become attached, they develop different attachment styles, okay? And what kind of attachment they emerge with, whether it's very secure, okay, or very kind of anxious and insecure, okay, it's a function of both individual temperament, something we're going to talk about in a few minutes, and the responsiveness of their parents and child care providers. Okay, and as we're going to see, early attachment impacts on later adult relationships and comfort with affection and intimacy. So Mary Ainsworth developed a paradigm called the strange situation to study attachment in the different so-called attachment styles. Okay, and here's how it goes. Okay, so basically the children are brought into a playroom. Okay, with the mother. Okay. So they play for a while, and they get used to their surroundings, and there's toys and there's things to play with and do and so on, books and such, picture books and things like that. And so the children play in the room with the mother, okay, and then the mother leaves. Okay, and later the mother's of course going to return. Okay, so what you observe, okay, is how the children play when the mom's in the room, and then importantly, what the kid does when the mother leaves, okay, both immediately and over time, okay, and then how the child behaves when the mother returns, okay. And through this procedure, Ainsworth and other researchers have been able to identify 3 types of attachment in children. So one, and the one that we seek, okay, we seek, is a more positive, favorable form of attachment, is that so when the mother's in the room at the beginning, the child stays close to mom, uses the mother as a safe base from which to explore, and happily goes about exploring, brings things back to the mother, uh, uh, to show her, uh, keeps returning to mom uh, from this exploration, stays close, keeps coming back, and so on. Okay, and then when mom leaves, okay, and the child shows some moderate distress, okay, when it's separated, not extreme, doesn't go, freak out, but there's a little bit of distress, but it's a moderate amount, okay. And when mom comes back, okay, the child is very happy, runs to mom, and it just gets visibly happier, back to normal, and really, really kind of, content and happy. Okay, that's the pattern. And when we see that pattern, the child's identified as securely attached. 2 other forms are the avoidant attachment, or the avoidant child. Okay, so here, when the mother and child enter the room, the child doesn't seek contact with the mother. Okay, goes about, looking around, doing things, and so on and so forth. Treats the mother, and if there's a stranger in the room as well, as there is in some cases, the same way. Okay, doesn't seek contact really with either. Okay, and when the mother leaves, rarely cries. Okay, seems to be kind of almost oblivious to the mother leaving, and when the mother comes back, kind of oblivious to that as well. Okay, so the child seems almost avoidant of the mother. Okay, so it's an avoidant attachment style. The third form is the anxious ambivalent. So, and this is characterized by the child being very upset, really, really upset when the mother leaves. Okay, visibly anxious. Okay, but when the mother returns, the child seeks closeness for a moment, urgently. Okay, but then squirms away. Okay, and doesn't, seems almost a bit, so there was anxiety with the mother not being there. There's anxiousness even when the mother's there. Some relief from that, but some ambivalence toward the mother. It's a push-pull kind of situation where the child is kind of ambivalent about mom, and it's very clear. Okay, so those are the 3 styles that were established, okay, and understood. Okay, now we're going to talk about a couple of things related to this. First of all, what's behind attachment differences, but also the patterns that are observed, okay, of attachment that we observe in infants, the evidence that they carry over into similar patterns in our adult lives, and in particular in our romantic relationships. So, for one thing that we can talk about as a preliminary to all this is that separation anxiety is separation anxiety and attachment. Okay, so here, just to give you an example, this is going back to what we were talking about earlier. We see that young children in this kind of pre-object permanence, sort of pre-separation anxiety stage, don't cry much when mom leaves when they're that young, but look at as they push forward in age, when separation anxiety first kicks in and gets stronger and stronger, the percentage of kids who cry when mom leaves, when mothers are have left the environment. Okay, and that's been studied both in daycare centers where, as well as in the home, where researchers come in and they observe, what happens when mom, goes away. Okay, and you can see the so we see separation anxiety peaks and fades whether kids are at home or in daycare. Okay, and this would be probably the strongest for the kids that are securely and ambivalently, particularly more securely attached, um, or at least attached to a reasonable extent. All right. So attachment styles, not just about bonding with parents. So one thing in the module on adolescence, you're introduced to Erikson's stages of social development, and one of the stages is the stage of basic trust, which is the third stage. Okay, and Erikson basically says that one of the achievements, important outcomes of the first couple of years of life, the first year or so of life, is whether or not the kid is going to develop basic trust in their world around them. Okay, whether they'll be distrustful and anxious about that world. Okay, that resembles the concept of attachment, but it extends beyond the family into our feeling of whether the world is predictable and trustworthy. We're more likely to get that when we become securely and satisfactorily attached in that first year. So attachment, so you get through this first stage of attachment, satisfactory, secure kind of attachment is sort of necessary, that critical period in the first year to achieve if we're going to trust our world, be able to go out there and trust that the world is predictable, it's trustworthy. Okay, and so that stays with us. An attachment style may be relevant to our ability to manage and enjoy adult relationships. It may even be relevant to our motivations to achieve or to avoid risks in our life. Okay, and Erikson and Piaget and everyone's answer would be to this question: yes. Um, um, and of course, there are questions, to still need to be explored. To what extent, this is what Erikson believes, this is what the strange situation in following kids up who are characterized this way suggests. Okay, but we don't know to what extent. Okay, we know that this is very important. The second one, formed by early experience with parents. We don't know to what extent that they can be reshaped, but it's not. There is evidence that it's hard to reshape our attachment style once we're past that critical period and it's set. Genetics may have something to do with it, but research continues in that realm. Okay, so here's some research done by Phil Shaver and his students a number of years ago. So is it is the attachment style we have with our parents related to the attachment style we exhibit in our romantic relationships? Okay, so they went and they asked people to, they took both a university sample and a newspaper sample in which people were asked to respond, which of the following best describes your feelings? Okay, and so they defined um, really what securely attached people are characterized by. Find it relatively easy to get close to others, comfortable depending on them and having them depend on me. I don't worry about being abandoned or about someone getting too close to me. And remarkably, about a little over half in both samples identified that as being true of them. Okay. What about the avoidant? I am somewhat uncomfortable being close to others. I find it difficult to trust them completely, difficult to allow myself to depend on them. I'm nervous when anyone gets too close. Love partners want me, and often love partners want me to be more intimate than I'm comfortable doing. Okay, about a quarter of both samples identified them as having this kind of avoidant attachment style, and then about 20% in both samples, remarkably so, um, um, agreed with this description of the anxious attachment person. Not that these terms were used in the description, just the description was given. I find that others are reluctant to get as close as I would like. I often worry that my partner doesn't really love me or won't stay for me. I want to merge complete with another person, but this desire sometimes scares people away. The anxiously attached person. Okay. So this seems to be about the distribution of people, at least in terms of self-report, who are securely, avoidantly, and anxiously attached. In, when they get to be adults. Okay, so then they did research looking at the romantic and interpersonal relationships of people who identified as having one of those three patterns that we just saw in the previous slide. Adults who had avoidant pattern, and then they went back. I should back up a bit and say, then they actually went back and did research looking at identifying these adults and trying to, and then also ask them, well, what was it like growing up? What was your pattern? In many cases, they tried to contact siblings, parents, and others, and to establish whether, well, did they have that? Was there an avoidant pattern in infancy? Was there an ambivalent pattern, anxious ambivalent? Was there a secure? Okay, and what they found, and then they looked at their behavior and their opinions and their kind of characteristics as adults. So adults who had an avoidant pattern in infancy, okay, tended to find it harder than others to trust and self-disclose. Okay, they rarely report true love. They seem to protect themselves by being aloof and distant. Okay, because they've got this avoidant pattern, and it translates into how they behave as adults and what their preferences are. Anxious, ambivalent, tended toward obsession, fear of lack of reciprocation. These are the types of people that will smother intimacy. That was supposed to be smother, not smoother. With possessiveness. They're highly jealous, very possessive. And adults who had secure attachment as infants tended to become close, trusting. They're more readily engaged in intimacy that would lead to a long-term relationship. And these tend to be the kind of adults that tend to be desired as partners, no matter what the attachment style of the other person is. Okay. Now these are correlational studies, but they're very intriguing in terms of what they suggest about the importance of the attachment style that emerged as a child, because of in many ways the way you were raised and the way your caretaker interacted with you. There's obviously limitations. Okay, the text discusses some of this. So there's a limitation in the research that we just talked about. It's wholly correlational, and it relies on memory in lots of cases, which could be selective, obviously, for something as sensitive as that. Does parenting style have a lot to do with the kind of attachment style you develop? In all likelihood, yes. And you should refer to the text for a more extensive discussion of that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So warmth, the caring of caregivers toward the child seems to count the most. That seems to be a very, very important variable. Okay, so if your parent, your mother is very warm, caring, okay, doesn't push you away, basically, if there's a lot of that there, okay, and it's consistent, you're going to get secure attachment. Okay, we know that early attachment is associated with later mental health. Daycare doesn't seem to have that much of an effect. A lot, you'd say, well, boy, the kid doesn't spend much time with the mother. Wouldn't that lead to less attachment, less secure attachment? Well, it's not so much the quantity, it's the quality. Okay, you got to spend obviously time with your kids, but that time needs to be to have this warmth, caring, non-rejecting, nurturing aspect to it to ensure the secure attachment we've been talking about. Okay, let's talk about temperament. So temperament is this like basic inborn disposition. Okay, it has to do with how we react to stress, how we react to different situations, how intense we are in many ways. And there are two major temperament styles: the difficult. So we see this in infants who are, come into the world. They tend to be irritable, intense, kind of unpredictable. All know kids like this. Then there are kids who are sort of easy, okay, cheerful, relaxed, feeding and sleeping on predictable schedules, and the kid has such a good temperament, okay. In a lot of ways, kids come into the world one way or the other. There are not necessarily too many extremes, but this is something that we notice early on, this individual difference between children. So temperament. So how do these temperament differences develop? One important point is that temperament tends to be a quality that persists over time. Okay, so the kind of temperament we display as young children, okay, even as infants, okay, is pretty highly correlated with the kind of temperament in terms of the easy versus difficult, if you will, distinction that we will show as adults. It's a very stable characteristic. Okay. Now, at birth, as I was saying, there might be some tendencies, but those tendencies can be made stronger, okay, when the caretaker responds in kind. Okay, we call these a reciprocal process. So the kid is edgy, intense, makes mom nervous, and others nervous, edgy, okay, and that's communicated to the child, which makes the child even more intense and edgy, and so we get a more difficult direction. That tendency becomes more. On the other hand, a very easy baby makes for a very calm mother, feeds back the calmness, the kid is even more calm. Okay, reciprocal processes. There's a lot of talk about goodness of fit. Okay, so the difficult child, okay, so how do you deal with kids that are kind of difficult early on? Okay, there's that tendency. So based, what the research suggests and what practical experience would also suggest, so a difficult child will do the best in a structured, very patient environment. You don't want to get this polarization, this reciprocal process going. Okay, so that's what I mean by having a good fit of the environment and the caretaker with the temperament of the kid. And then the channeling of temperament in personality traits. Temperament affects how we engage with the environment as we develop. So our learning and our habits may ultimately reflect this temperament as we move through life. Hence, as I was saying, there's a bit of a stability, okay, to temperament as a characteristic of the person through life. Okay, deprivation of attachment. So we were talking about those poor rhesus monkeys. We were talking about insecure and anxious attachment and things like that. If children live without safe, nurturing, affectionate caretaking, they may still be resilient, that is, bounce back and succeed. Okay, it's not a, I don't want to say a death sentence. It doesn't doom you to, bad personality qualities or failure in life and so on. A lot of kids are very resilient. They can overcome uh, the lack of this kind of emotional bonding, positive bonding that's necessary in the form of attachment. Okay, but that's resilient children, and not all children are resilient. If the child experiences severe, prolonged deprivation or abuse, failure of satisfactory, secure attachment, he may have difficulty forming attachments, as we saw in the Shaver research just previously, have increased anxiety and depression, have lowered intelligence, show increased aggression, and beyond. Okay, this is something out of the Myers textbook. In this 1980s Romanian orphanage, I'll just read it with you. The 250 children between ages 1 and 5 outnumbered caregivers 15 to 1. When such children were tested after Romania's dictator was assassinated, they had lower intelligence scores and double the 20% rate of anxiety symptoms found in children assigned to quality foster care settings. Okay, all kinds of problems, because how can one develop a secure attachment when the caregivers, when there are 15 children for every potential caregiver in that particular kind of setting? Okay. Self-concept. A major task of infancy may be to form healthy attachments. Okay, for sure, and it's a very important contributor to to ultimately the kind of healthy self-concept that you're going to have later. A major task of childhood may be to form a healthy self-concept, a stable and positive understanding of your identity. By age 8 to 10, a child moves from, hey, that's me in the mirror, to I have skills, I have preferences, I have goals, okay? Kind of a identity, okay? It's not just, that's me, okay? That's me and I am, okay? And this prepares the child for confident success. So, self-concept, okay, really starts appearing in those middle years of childhood. All right, let's talk about parenting styles for a few minutes. Okay, so there's been a lot of research on parenting styles, and there are basically three sort of categories, three types of parenting styles, broadly speaking. Okay, so we have the authoritarian style, okay, in which the parents tend to be coercive. They impose rules, such as "because I said so," okay, not with reason or explanation, and they expect obedience. That's the authoritarian style. The permissive style is the parents are unrestraining, they submit to kids' desires, They don't enforce the limits or standards for child behavior. They're just basically let the kids, if you will, use the proverbial term, run wild. And then there's the authoritative style. Okay, authoritative parents are confrontive. Okay, they enforce rules, limits, and standards. Okay, I got two typos there. They enforce rules, limits, and standards, but also explain, discuss, listen, and express respect for the child's ideas and wishes. So it's a a reasoning-based, okay, child rearing. Okay, there are rules and there are limits, but they are contextualized with explanations and give the child an opportunity to discuss and express how they're feeling about those things. So those are the three styles: too hard, too soft, and just right. And so basically, parenting styles reflect varying degrees of control over the child. Okay, what kind of adults do these styles produce? Well, authoritative parents tend to have children who have the highest self-esteem, and that tends to carry over into adulthood, who are self-reliant and who show a lot of social competence. Permissive parents tend to have children who are more aggressive and immature. Authoritarian parents tend to have children with less social skills and self-esteem. Okay, so the quote unquote just right tends to produce the most psychologically and socially healthy children, and in turn adults. Okay, here's another. So this more desirable parenting style has some good outcomes, but we might ask the proverbial question, because we can't do experiments, right? This is all correlational research and observational research. And are these and archival research and so on, are these nice outcomes with authoritative parenting compared to the other parenting styles? Are they the result of parenting style? But maybe the parents are responding to a child's temperament. I got to use this style, okay, with this kid, okay. Or are both a function of culture or genes, okay? So we don't know all the answers there, but we do know that there seems to be pretty compelling suggestive evidence that authoritative parenting is a likely cause of more positive personality and social competence outcomes. Okay, well, this has turned into a pretty long narration, so I'm going to stop this one here and continue on with the third on development, where we'll pick up with just a little bit on adolescence and on moral development. So we'll get to that in the next narration, which will be a much shorter one.